Hello and welcome to Tattva Conversations and Explorations. For our fourth episode, we sat down with Dr. Katie Steckles, a mathematician based in Manchester, UK, who gives talks and workshops and writes about mathematics. She has talked about maths in schools, at science festivals, on BBC Radio, TV, at music festivals, as a part of theatre shows, and on the internet. She also lectures part-time at Sheffield Hallam University in the Institute of Education. Dr. Steckles' work as a math communicator is to take math out of the classroom and into the world, so people can experience math in a more personal way and experience all the wonderful possibilities that can come to fruition when math becomes synonymous with fun rather than fear. She also shared how studying math can add to the way we look and operate in the world in real time. We hope this conversation can help the listeners see math as something beyond the textbook, beyond the fear, beyond a sense of inadequacy, and see it for its tattva, its true essence, and for the intricate tapestry of numbers, symbols, theorems, which when closely observed by the student, provide new ways to see the world and ourselves. Hello, Dr. Katie. Welcome to Tattva. Thank you for your time, and I'm really looking forward to this. So I guess we'll just get started.
Yep.
Okay. I think my first question is the most obvious one. So you are a mathematician and you're also a math communicator. Could you please start by describing your work in both these areas?
Okay, well, I studied maths at university and I carried on, did a PhD in maths and did a bit of research. So if anyone's interested, the research was into dynamical systems, so looking at the ways that kind of physical bodies move around in space and that kind of thing. And in particular, looking at the topology of that, so looking at the different shapes that things can make when they move around, and sort of studying those systems less from the side of the physics of, you know, how things actually get computed, but more from the side of what patterns you can make and what sort of symmetry they have and that kind of thing. So it was quite a nice little project, sort of crossing over between those two different areas. And I finished my PhD just a bit over 10 years ago now, which is terrifying to realise, but that's the timescale, I guess. And while I was there studying at PhD level, I got involved in a few different projects to do with maths outreach. And that was kind of people doing mathematical performance and people sharing maths and doing talks. And it was something that I realised was something I'd be quite interested in doing, partly because I'd sort of considered being a teacher, but then thought maybe that might be too much pressure and too stressful, because I know teachers are absolutely incredible people, but the work they do is really, really stressful sometimes. And I just thought, I don't know if I could handle that. But actually doing the outreach stuff has been a really nice way to sort of share my interest in maths and at the same time be able to do lots of different things. And so I'm freelance. I work for a number of different organizations at different times, and I do a lot of work sort of individually, and I will basically do anything that involves communicating maths. So I go into schools sometimes, I talk about maths at science festivals, I do and other types of festivals as well. I've done music festivals and various other things. I'll do kind of projects, like short scale projects, like working with art galleries or working with theatre shows. I do a little bit of teaching at a university now, so I lecture in maths at university level. I've also done lots of videos for YouTube. I've done bits of TV and radio stuff. I've done writing about maths, a bit of podcasting as well. So basically any format that you can find mass communication in. And I guess that's sort of a result of being kind of freelance, is that you're sort of free to explore all of those different things. But it is a little bit more kind of hectic, and it doesn't feel quite as safe as a solid full-time job somewhere, but it is fun. And I guess as long as I'm able to keep doing that, I'm quite happy to. So my job is a lot of different things. It's one of those things that's really hard. If someone says, what do you do? I'm like, well, how long do you have? In general, anything that is communicating maths, getting people interested in the subject, sharing, you know, the interesting and the beautiful parts of maths with other people.
Yeah. So you do research as a mathematician, and then you're also a math communicator. And anyone who visits your website, you've given us a nice little, tight description of what you do, and your website really lists down all the things that you're involved in, and it's a lot. It's a lot. A lot of different things that you're doing, activities that you're involved in. So what I want to know, and I think a lot of people would want to know this from you, that when you're doing your research, it's in an area which is specific to research. I don't think you're taking in your math communication that probably isn't directly a part of your math communication. So there is time dedicated to the research. There is time dedicated to planning events, writing scripts, going on shows. So both these things, though connected by math and having you in common, are still quite independent in themselves. So my question is, how do you juggle your time?
I think so. The research that I did for my PhD, which, as I say, was a little while ago, I don't do so much actual maths research at the moment, but I do know people who do juggle those two things at the same time, and that is a lot of work to do. I do a bit of research at the minute into maths communication, I guess, because that is now the thing that I'm mainly focused on. So I've done a couple of different research projects recently. I say since I started teaching at university, that everyone else is doing bits of research and things, and there's a whole kind of area of research in maths education and in maths communication, looking at sort of the ways that people learn and the ways that the best ways to communicate things, I guess. And it's sort of an interesting thing because a lot of maths communication is done by people who are really interested in maths and have to sort of develop and learn those communication skills to be able to kind of effectively communicate. But actually there is a lot of research done into that as well, and it's often rare that people actually have the time to go and dig into that and learn a bit more about the sort of theory behind it. And some of the bits of research that I've done have been looking into sort of the ways that maybe if you're a young person who sees some kind of maths outreach thing, like you watch a video on YouTube about maths, or how does that affect your perception of maths, and how does that affect your decision to maybe go and study maths at university? So there's been some really interesting questions to sort of ask in that area, and it's been really interesting reading all of the other sort of papers and research about that. But yeah, it's always a juggling act. As I say, I have colleagues who do both in maths and wider science do research alongside outreach, and it is often a bit of a struggle because, especially if your main job is working in a research department in a university, the outreach is sort of seen as a kind of extra that you're just sort of doing on top of whatever else you're doing, and it's not really seen as something that should be a priority. And I've known some people who've really struggled to get even just the time to do it or the permission from the department to do it. But it is one of those things that is undervalued, I think. And I say, having the subject knowledge is one thing, having the communication skills is actually a totally separate skill that sometimes people just assume, oh, this person is very knowledgeable, therefore they can come and give a brilliant lecture. But actually it takes a lot of practice and a lot of work and a lot of preparation to be able to give a really good talk or a lecture about something. But it's also undervalued in the sense that it's actually a really important skill, even if you're just a researcher. Not just obviously being a researcher is an incredible job, but if your main focus is doing your research, you still need to communicate that. If you whatever you do, unless you can communicate it to someone else, you might as well not have done it. So
I totally agree.
The ability to kind of write a really good paper that is easy to understand or that will communicate what you've done effectively, and those skills, I think, are something that everyone kind of needs to develop, especially if you want to communicate your research. So even if you're just giving seminars internally in the department, you can tell when you see someone who's good at giving seminars and you think, oh, this was great, I really enjoyed it, I really understood the content. And when you see someone give a really bad seminar, it's also very, very obvious. So I think it's a bit of a balancing act to sort of, because even though I'm not doing kind of actual on the ground maths research, is still a lot of things to juggle with my time, but it's about sort of keeping all of those different plates spinning at the same time, doing little bits on each of the things. And a lot of the people that I work with are in a very similar situation, so they're all quite understanding if it takes me a little bit longer to get back to them about something. That's kind of standard, and everyone is very forgiving about that.
Beautiful. So see, one thing is clear from your conversation, like communication is a totally different skill, and it's a skill we acquire with time. You practice, you learn, you make mistakes, you through trials and error, and you get there. Even like you said, if you're writing a research paper, you want it to be understood. You're communicating, you might not know who you're communicating it to, but you want it to be understood, so might as well you communicate it well. But I think the question still stands, so how do you manage your time? Like, do you have a diary? Do you have some Google Calendar? Do you have some insights, that, okay, this is something specifically I do that kind of puts me in the zone. This is how I, stack up my activities. And in order to make the most out of what I have, so that when I give something away, it's, I know that I've been able to do justice to it. So let's take it on from there. But those insights that, if you have any, that somebody can practically take advantage of.
Yeah, well, I think doing a PhD has been a really useful thing in terms of my own development as a person who's organised. And obviously, all of this is with the understanding that people who don't do PhDs also spend those 3 years of their lives doing things. So I'm not saying that this is something that's unique to people with PhDs, but for me, that was a real opportunity to kind of train myself to be able to make myself work. Because you study at school, you study at university, and all of that time you're given tasks to do, you're given worksheets, you're given exams at the end of the year, you've got a focus, you've got something to work towards, and you get to PhD level and someone just goes, here's a thing, have a think about this for 3 years, and your job is then to make yourself do that. And it's really difficult, and for some people it's a real step, because it's the first time in their life that they've been given charge of their own time almost, and kind of the idea of motivating yourself to keep working on something, and especially in maths, because one thing people say about doing maths research is that you spend 90% of your time being stuck, and that is absolutely the truth. You can work at something and you can not have a clue what to do next, and you can bash your head against it for hours and hours, and then suddenly you have an idea or a breakthrough, and then it's fine. And that time when you can't make any progress, or that time when you're not sure what to do, or you've got something that you could do but you're a bit intimidated by it, so you don't really want to start on it in case it turns out to be really difficult, like all of that time is really tough from a sort of motivation point of view. It's very different to if you're doing something where every time you sit down and work on it you make a load of progress. So part of the thing that I gained from my PhD was the ability to just notice when my brain was doing things like putting something off because I didn't want to do it, or all of those sort of self habits that you get into. I've become very aware of that. So that was a really useful thing to be able to say, oh, I see what's happening here. I don't need to read Twitter for 25 minutes. I need to get on with my work, so I'm going to stop doing that. And that was a real. And obviously I say, there's plenty of other ways to develop that ability, but the PhD is really plunging you in at the deep end of just like, you're in charge now. Do whatever. So that was a useful thing. But I think also with the sort of freelance thing, it is a lot of kind of managing yourself, because you are your own boss. And in a normal job situation you would have a manager who would check in with you, who would do like a review and see how you're getting on and check what your responsibilities are and how you're dealing with those things, and you kind of have to provide that all for yourself, which is difficult. And if you're not a very good boss, it doesn't really help, because you're your own boss, so you're not doing yourself any favors. But yeah, my main strategy seems to just be do whatever is working for me at the time, and that essentially means that kind of roughly every 6 months or so there's a change in what is the best thing for me, and I have to kind of adapt to it. So at the minute I've got a paper calendar on the wall and I fill it in every week that's got what I've got on that week. I keep everything in an online calendar as well, which is a Google Calendar, just because I need to be able to update it wherever I am and have it kind of a centralized thing. I did try a paper diary for a while, and I found that anytime I needed to write something in it and I didn't have it on me at the time, I was just stuck. So yeah, I couldn't add things to it unless I was physically stood in the room with it. So I thought, okay, I'll keep that online, and then I can update it from my phone or from my computer or whatever. But I write it out on the paper one because it gives me a sort of focus for the week, and then I can physically cross things out, which is quite a satisfying thing to do. And that'll include sort of timed events that I have to be at a place at a time, and also things that I want to try and get done that day, and I can cross those out as well. But yeah, it's a lot of to-do lists. It's a lot of trying to sort of split up my day as well, because I work on so many different things. I'll say, okay, I'm going to do an hour on this, and my brain knows as I get towards the end of that hour, oh, I'm going to be able to work on something else in a bit, so I might as well just put some more effort into this thing. And it's almost sort of a cliche. I remember when I was a student at school, we were told about how to plan your revision time, and there was this graph that someone showed us that was what your concentration looks like during the time that you're working on something, and it just sort of starts high and then just gradually goes downwards. But if you've got a planned break, it sort of goes up again towards the end of the block of work. So I kind of keep that in my mind, that actually if I know I'm going to have a break in half an hour, I'll be able to kind of work all the way up to that, and then I make myself have a break, because obviously it's important to keep, make sure you get up and walk around sometimes, for your eyes to not be staring at a screen all day, to get up and look at something out the window or whatever. And even though it feels like you're sort of stopping yourself in the middle of something, it's actually better to have that break, and then you can come back to it refreshed. And
That,
especially with maths, you often carry on thinking when you're not doing it. So you come back and you've got new ideas.
Amazing. So there's so much I've picked up from what you've just said. And also adding a little bit of your interview on number file, where you were discussing these things. So here is what I've felt after talking to you for this little short while and after listening to all your videos online. One thing you say is self-awareness, which is what you kind of said now also. You're becoming aware of yourself, things that you know you'd like to do, and things that you know can be put off for later. Somewhere you know how to manage yourself. But the sense of self-awareness, I think, was somewhere, this is what I've gathered from your interview, so please correct me if I'm wrong, that the sense of self-awareness was somewhere even before you started your PhD, because here is something that you said in the interview. You said PhD should be difficult. It's really that simple. It takes away all the romanticism just drops, like that. So it should be difficult. And if you don't know what you're getting into, if you don't know that you will get stuck, if you don't know that you will have a really difficult time ahead, if you don't know that things will get worse than you can ever imagine, and without knowing all this, if you enter, it's not going to be impossible, but you might make it tougher for you than it needs to be. It's actually already so tough. By not knowing these basic things about what PhD is like, you make it tougher. So you have that sense of getting into something, knowing what you're getting into. So you step in, you dip your toes into the water, and you kind of scan it. Okay, this works for me. This is how it works for me. And if you're doing new things every 6 months, some people might think, how are you doing new things every 6 months? Why aren't you sustaining something for a longer period of time? But it works for you, and you've proven it. So I think you've found your own way, and that's what you're suggesting people also to do. Have some self-awareness, know what you're getting into, and find your feet.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it changes for me, sometimes it's just that I've gotten into a rut with it, and I'm doing the same thing, but it's not kind of working to motivate me anymore. And sometimes things carry on working for longer than that. Sometimes it's less than 6 months. I just think I need a new system. And sometimes it'll just be like someone buys me a nice new notebook for my birthday, and I'm like, oh, I'll start using this, and that then becomes my thing that I write stuff down on. Just occasionally it's good to sort of step back and take a sort of wider look at yourself and the way you're working and the way that you're productive. Sometimes I'll sit down and I'll just like, what are the projects I'm currently working on? When are they all due in? Like, what's the deadlines? Are there any things that are going to, need doing ahead of stuff? And I make a list of all of those things. And also, because another thing, as a freelancer, you kind of have to worry about how much money you're making on different things. So like which of these things am I doing that are making me money? Which of these things are doing things that I'm doing voluntarily, because it's an organization that I want to support, and how much of that am I putting in? Because it's very easy for that to creep up and become an unmanageable amount of your workload, is stuff that you're doing voluntarily or for free or as a favor for someone else. And it's so easy to forget that actually I need to be doing enough work to make money. But it depends on different people, and some people really struggle to sort of find enough paid work. I've been really lucky, I think, in that people come to me with things quite often, and a lot of the things I've managed to get involved with have been things that I can manage to put together an income from. And now that I'm doing the part-time teaching at the university as well, that's nice to have a little bit of a solid income behind as well. But all of these things have to factor into sort of your decision making as a freelancer, like how am I managing my time and how is this working for me? And just sort of keeping in mind, even if you're not getting paid for something, you will be still getting the benefit of the experience and the
exposure.
And a little bit of the exposure. It's one of those things that people often say, oh,
that's
do this, it'll be great exposure.
That's the carrot,
and I think it is sometimes the case that that's true, and sometimes it's actually not that true for different things. And it's one of those things that sometimes is used a bit unfairly against freelancers to say, oh, but this is going to be good for you. You have to genuinely kind of weigh that up, and as well as that, and the experience and the connections and the I guess having done someone a nice favor that might be able to do something for you in the future, that kind of thing. And it's a lot of networking as well. I think being a freelancer, it's about having those contacts and having friends and having people that you work well with as well, which is quite a nice a way to work, is to sort of identify the people that you click with, and that when you work with them it's a nice easy process, and also to identify the people that when you work with them it's a bit of a nightmare and you're constantly the one that's having to do all the work, and just sort of not working with those people so much. There's a whole kind of evolution over
Yes.
time of what you choose to get involved with. And that's part of the difficulty and the pleasure of being a freelancer, I guess, is that you can sort of pick and choose what you do to an extent.
Yeah.
But it also means that responsibility is on you as well.
Yes, absolutely. So now I want to move a little bit more towards math as a subject. Now, math is anything but something that's limited to certain idea. It's quite boundless. It's expanding as we speak. Yet most people's perception of math is limited to fear, limited to anxiety, and other similar negative emotions. Most people feel that way. Why do you think math ends up making people feel uncomfortable and afraid in many cases, more than the other subjects might make them feel?
It's probably a combination of things. So there is a sort of existing perception of maths in society, which for whatever reason it's occurred and people sort of perpetrate it. So you'll find, people will say, oh, don't worry if you're struggling with this maths. I was never any good at maths when I was at school. Or they'll say, oh, that's difficult. If you see a TV show where there's a kid who's got some homework that they're really struggling with, it's always maths homework. And it's sort of become that character within the universe of subjects, that it's the one that is horrible, that everyone hates. And that in itself is quite annoying, because it's a thing that people keep either deliberately or otherwise perpetrating and continuing to repeat, which is really unhelpful. And I often see mathematician colleagues seeing, advertising campaigns and saying, oh, why is it saying maths? Why could it not be some history or some geography homework that someone's stuck on or whatever? But then at the same time, there's sort of an underlying point that actually maths is quite hard. It's not the easiest subject, and I'm not saying that other subjects are easy in comparison. Being a historian is an incredibly difficult task, and it's a mess to sort out what's true and what's something that someone just said, and what how good your sources are and that kind of thing. All subjects have their own separate challenges, but I think one of the things about maths is it's possible to be 100% correct. You can get 100% in a maths test because you can write down all of the correct answers.
Right.
And it kind of adds this sort of pressure of like, are you actually right or are you wrong? Because there's some subjects where, depending on what you're writing about,
there's no in between.
Yeah, maths it can be quite black and white in that way. And I think that's also part of this false perception. So yes, you can get all of the right answers in a maths exam, but as someone who now marks maths exams quite regularly, one thing that I really want to get across to people is that actually, if you write all the right things, but not actually the right answer, I know that you understand the concept. I know that you are aware of how all of the things fit together. I'm aware that you understand this piece of mathematics, but maybe you put a plus instead of a minus somewhere. I kind of don't care about that. I'm going to give you a pretty good mark, even if you've made a tiny mistake somewhere, because the rest of it, because I can see that you understand this thing. And if you write out loads and loads of calculations, but they're the wrong ones, or, even if all of them are correct, I don't think you understand.
Right.
The mark isn't necessarily based on exactly getting the right answers. And I think one thing that people don't realize about mathematicians is that we really get things wrong quite often. But one thing that we have is that we have both an understanding of what we think the answer probably should be. We've got a sense of, actually, there's no way it's going to be that, because it should be 100 times bigger than that. I must have done something wrong somewhere. I'll go back. And also that sort of ability to analyze our own work and go back and find those errors. It's actually one of the bits of research that I've been doing at the minute into maths education stuff was around the idea of making mistakes. And we were talking to one of our undergraduate classes, and we essentially ran a session with them where we got me and one of the other lecturers in the maths department to do some maths problems on a blackboard that we'd never seen before. And it was really interesting, because the students are very used to seeing maths lecturers who've got the notes for the course that they're teaching, and they've taught it several times before, and they know exactly what all the answers are going to be, and they come in and they say, here's how you do this calculation, and they show them everything and it all works perfectly. And we'd literally been given, I think it was some A-level questions, so sort of upper high school level questions that we'd not seen before. And obviously me and this other lecturer hadn't even done that kind of level of maths for quite a few years, and it was all stuff that we definitely were capable of. But we got these questions out and we sort of looked at them completely fresh in front of the students and had a go. And we got it wrong. We got some of the bits wrong. Some of the bits were like, I can't remember what to do here. I'm going to have to look it up on the internet. Got my phone out and Googled it. There was some bits where I did a calculation on the board, made a mistake, and then spotted it and went back and fixed it. And it was really interesting for the students because a lot of them had this perception of, if you are a mathematician, it means you're really good at doing things right the first time and you never get anything wrong. And I'm like, maybe there are some people who are like that, but the vast majority of people are not like that, because maths is difficult. It's easy to make mistakes, and it's not about never making any mistakes. It's about understanding the subject enough that you can tell when something comes out wrong, that it's probably wrong, or that when something's right. You can different ways of checking it. If you get the answer to a thing, put it back into the equation you started with and see if it comes out with the right answer, sort of thing. And the thing that we were trying to get across to them was not that we are perfect to do everything right first time, but that we've got those tools and we understand enough about what we're doing to be able to make those checks. And that was a real kind of learning experience for the students, because we did some little interviews with them afterwards and we got them to fill in some questionnaires about it. And some of them were genuinely shocked, and they were like, I thought these people were clever.
I can imagine. Yeah.
But actually what we were trying to do was get them to reevaluate their notion of what clever is, really, because when they are sat doing that work, they're going to make mistakes and they're going to get to points where they're stuck and they don't know what to do next. And if your perception is that that means you're bad at maths, or that you're stupid, or that you can't do it, it will stop you. It'll cut you off, and it'll make you feel like you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. And actually that is completely the opposite. And real mathematicians, whatever that means, I do finger quotes there, do have that experience. They get stuck, they get confused, they make a mistake, but it's part of the process. It isn't wrong and it isn't bad. It's just part of what goes on. And that was a really interesting experience for us as well, I think, to sort of see.
I mean, I totally get it. And here is what I think there is a re-looking at education itself some way. So it's being turned into a two-way bridge, which I think is a very good way. So the teacher is not the all-knowing, never wrong entity you cannot even touch them. So here they are, something is being given to them, and like regular human beings with a little more knowledge than the person sitting on the other end, with a little more knowledge than them, with a few more tools than they have, they're able to find their way around. You got the answer wrong, which only makes it more human. And suddenly you say, okay, they get it wrong, they teach me, but that's okay. If they can get it wrong, if I get it wrong, doesn't mean it's the end of the world. And I remember this being so important, this way of looking at math through the one who's teaching you. So the teacher is like is the image of math being formless. The teacher is the form that math takes. So even in our schools, like my husband and I, we were discussing this, that math became difficult. Math became the bad guy, because of how it was taught to us. Like in my school, oftentimes we were told to just mug it up. Mug it up. Just pick up the guidebook. These are the questions. Last 10 years, this is what has been coming. Mug it up. So in some very amazing sense, they were telling us to look for patterns in these 10 years. Which questions do you think will really appear this year? So, but nobody had the wits to look at it that way. It was just get over with it. Just get done with it. And it puts a fear. It makes you think, what's the whole point of it anyway? But what you're doing, you're stepping into the shoes of the student once again and saying that, hey, we never really stop learning, and learning is difficult, whether you're on this side of the bench or that side of the bench, it's always difficult. So,
well, it's one of those things that if your perception of maths is that you get the answer right straight away and you know everything and you're very, that's what being good at maths means, then it's sort of a misconception. And it's often the way that it's presented that, it's important to get the right answers. And it is, because it's important to get the right answers. If you're building a massive bridge, you kind of want the calculations to be correct. But the way you get to that point isn't necessarily just through being good at it. It's about practice. It's about, repeating things. And this is possibly why your teachers are saying, just keep doing these questions, practice doing these questions, because practice is one aspect of it. But it's also about seeing patterns in things. And, people sometimes say to me, should I teach my kids to memorize the times tables? Should I get them to recite the times tables over and over again so that they can remember, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6, and so on? And I don't know if there's sort of a balance to be struck, because to some extent going in with some of that information in your head makes it easier. It makes it quicker. If you come to a calculation you need to do 6 times 8, you've got that's in your head already. But at the same time, if you look at that as a sort of as a mathematician with a mathematician's head on, you can sort of see patterns in things. So you know that if you multiply something by 9, you get a number where the digits add up to 9. And you can check, if you think, oh, 7 times 9, that's 65. Oh no, wait, that can't be right, because they need to add up to 9, it's 63. It gives you that sort of extra layer of protection, I guess, against making errors. And that kind of knowing and understanding the patterns in those things is more useful. Anything that's a multiple of 4 is going to be an even number. All of these sort of structures that are sat sort of within that are more useful to you than actually just having it in your brain, because if you remember something slightly wrong, that's then going to continue being wrong whenever you use it. So yeah.
Wow, this is so amazing. So it's like saying, yeah, if you get something wrong, there is a way to get it right, and that way is just there is a pattern in there somewhere, and you can learn that pattern, and that's more important. So this leads to a question that I have been asking a lot of mathematicians. We've also had a philosopher of mathematician on the channel, Dr. Balaga. It was really interesting listening to his point of view. And there is one question that I've been asking them that's in common, which is, and you kind of get into it in your interview on number 5. You were talking about how math is taught in school and in college. And what you say is this, and I'm quoting you here: school math is really just about methods. It's about learning techniques that you can use to solve problems. And you kind of start to get a glimpse of what math really is, but you aren't doing proper math. And in uni, it totally flips. In the university, it totally flips on its head. And it's like, now we're proving things, and that there are so many more things in maths than you ever possibly realized. I had a different question prepared for this, but since we're on track of how math is being perceived, do you think that even at the school level, when we're basically giving these techniques, these methods, these formulas, which is just pick them up and run with it? Don't ask too many. There's not too much to know. 2 + 2 is 4. What are you getting? There's nothing more to look for right now when you are in class 2, when you're in class 3, whatever. But maybe at some point, math as an idea, as a field of exploration, which allows you to be free. It doesn't kind of turns you don't feel bunched up because you're in a math class. But at what level do you think at the school level, for a child who's between, let's say, 10 to 16 or 8 to 16, something like that, at what age do you think it's a good idea, through mathematical concepts, the idea of math can be introduced? That like Dr. Balaga said, yeah, geometry is a good place to start, where it's talking about space. So another mathematician is talking about using nature as a book in itself. Looking for patterns there, coming back and checking it in your books, and saying, oh, I get it, I saw it there. This is how it works. Do you have anything that comes to your mind, any insight on this subject as to what point in school can math be introduced as an idea, not just as a tool, but as something that allows you to think?
Well, I think it partly depends on the person, I guess. Like, different people will engage with maths in different ways, and some of them will still be sort of getting their head around the actual how, and how to kind of turn the handle and make the numbers come out the other end. But I think once you've sort of got that, and it isn't something that intimidates you anymore, and I think for some people that happens at primary school, and for some people that happens when they're a little bit older, kind of you can start to sort of see how it connects to other things. One thing I'm always really keen on is the idea that science in general often uses mathematics. If you're doing observations of nature, or you're doing astronomy, or you're studying engineering or something like that, a lot of the stuff that you're doing will involve using maths. And the way that schools teach these different subjects, you have a maths classroom, you have a science classroom, and it's in a different place in the school, and you go in the science classroom to do science, and you go in the maths classroom to do maths. And it's very difficult for the teachers to kind of work across both of those things together. And some schools do this absolutely fantastically. And I remember sometimes when I was at school, we'd have like a cross-curriculum day where we would all come out of our normal lessons, and we'd spend the day working on a project. And the maths teacher would be there, and the history teacher would be there, and the art teacher would be there, and they'd get us to produce a lot of related material. and sort of see how those things connect together on the one topic. And that kind of thing is really great if schools can do that. But it's even just day to day in the maths classroom saying, here's a bit of maths. Oh, and by the way, if you know this, if you can use this technique, you can use it to calculate, this in science. Or if you study this bit of, knot theory or topology, you can use it to study DNA molecules in biology, or, kind of putting those connections in. And one thing I always say is I know that teachers are, as I say, very stressed, very important, busy people who have a lot of important work to do, and they're given a list of things they have to teach, and they've got to get through it all, and they've got to make sure the kids are ready for the exams. And it's often really difficult for them to find time to sort of put in those extra things. And it's something that we really need to kind of build in to the curriculum, into the way that these things are taught, that actually maths isn't the thing that you do in that one room over there on a Monday afternoon. Like, it is connected to all of these other things. And in the science classroom to say, oh, here's a thing, and here's how you use this bit of maths, and kind of pulling it in that way. And even in the sort of outreach world, you go to a science festival and you've got people there going, come and be a chemist, come and do some chemistry and put some chemicals in a thing together and make an explosion. And they're not saying, also do loads of calculations about volumes and quantities and, rates of reaction and, all of this stuff. And I know someone who's a professional chemist, and the amount of maths he does is ridiculous. Like, it's a really interesting crossover between the two, but he knows loads and loads of things from maths that I wouldn't expect a chemist to need to use, but actually there is all of this connection there. And it's something that I don't know if we necessarily hide it from people, but we don't emphasize it enough, that actually maths isn't just the thing that you do in the maths classroom, and it is partly, it's a thing that underlies all of these other things and gives you all of these tools that you need to do all this other stuff, but also it's in itself has other layers to it and has other different directions you can take it in. And as you say, geometry is one of those things that, you're at school, you study bits of shapes and angles and bits of stuff like that, but actually, you've got all of this really nice sort of higher dimensional stuff and really cool things that actually and it's something that as a person who does outreach, I've been really privileged to be able to bring that to young people and to say, look, here is a 4-dimensional shape, and here is the entire theory of how we categorize knots, and here is a piece of maths that you wouldn't otherwise meet unless you went and did maths at university. And they can go, oh, I kind of see that maths isn't just about how much money I've got in my pocket, or how, like, it is very useful for that, and it's a very important skill to be able to do sort of basic arithmetic and calculations, but there's so much focus on that that people forget that it's not just about numbers, it's about thinking, it's about training your brain to understand new things and see patterns in the universe and kind of interpret stuff and use those skills to be able to do things like science as well.
No, I completely understand. I can't stress how much I do, empathize with everything you're saying. In fact, in school, I remember, so everyone's observing. A student is, whether he or she knows it or not, their things are getting into their minds. What lacks is the ability to integrate here, which is somewhere the system is evolving, yes, but there are always these things to be fixed. The teachers are also trying to keep up with, there's always, things can always improve. But in this mind of the student, so you go to chemistry, physics, and maths. Let's take these, okay, physics, chemistry, and math. There was always a sense of something is common, but what ties them really together? So you see symbols and all. There's theory in one, but there is theorem in another. So there were always these little things that kind of were similar, but the student did not have the ropes to, walk that bridge. What is it that's connecting? And you don't even have that sensibility and the maturity and the wisdom to be able to formulate your question, to say, ma'am, we studied this in math in the last class, and now we study something similar. Can you explain to me what it is that I'm feeling? I don't know what I'm feeling, but there's something in there. So we don't have that. We didn't have that kind of ability to string our thoughts together. Something is moving, but you didn't know how to join it. So that whole curriculum integration program in your school, I think that's quite far ahead in itself. And I think at some point in India, in the Gurushalas, like where we in ancient systems of education, maybe this integration was very much a part of the curriculum. Like, it was a part of the curriculum. It was not something you do outside. It is also what is done alongside math and Sanskrit and language and whatever else.
I think it's just it's a function of the way that schools work. You know, you have to have teachers who are specialists in the different subjects, and the easiest way to do that is to have a timetable and have different subjects at different times in different rooms. And you know, it's partly a sort of practical thing. But yeah, if you can build in a way for people to sort of put those things together and work, you know, teachers work with each other and put things together, then yeah. But it depends how the school is even structured, because I say it's logistically easier to have the students go from one room to another and do different subjects. So yeah,
it's a matter of contemplation, and I think yes, maybe some change is needed, and let's see how it comes about. What I also want to know from you is this. We've spoken about your PhD experience, and we've spoken about how it was difficult, as it should be. And you said that one way that you could cope up with it well was because a lot of your friends were also doing PhD with you, correct?
Yeah.
So they were also doing, so you had shoulders to lean on. So a bad day at work, you can, you know, you go and catch up with your friends and probably find a way out of it. But yeah, I would like to know that, were there times when you did not have friends around you, when they were busy with their own thing, and you had to, in the end, rely on yourself? Let's say 1-2 times out of 10 you had to rely on yourself. How did you then cope? And because it's some kind of anxiety connected. I've not done PhD, but I have taken education seriously in my own way. Both my husband and I were educating ourselves seriously, and we do run into walls, and there are times when you don't know where to go, and you know, you kind of cut off from the rest of the world who are not sharing your point of view. So it can lead to some kind of anxiety. And how did you cope up with it? And what ideas, I'm sure from your answer we'll get some ideas also that you can have for other pupils who are dealing with math related anxiety, not necessarily if they're doing PhD, but just generally. Like fear is like fear, but this anxiety which doesn't let you stay at peace. How did you deal with it? And then if you have any ideas when you could not rely on your friends.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I have to say the department that I was working in was a really good one in terms of kind of social, you know, communication. We had a daily coffee meeting every morning at 10:30. Everyone would come down and they'd set up the coffee machine, so it would just be ready at that time, so everyone could come and have a cup of coffee. And I think that in some departments that's quite a rare thing. I think it's not always the case that people do actually kind of get together once a day and have a little chat. But there was always that sense of, like, even if you were struggling with something, even if you couldn't actually explain the thing you were struggling with to someone, the knowledge that they were also probably struggling with something as well was enough to sort of comfort you and you know, make you feel like you weren't alone in your struggle. But yeah, the process of kind of getting yourself to where you need to be, I mean, it isn't easy. And you know, you talk about maths anxiety, and that's a thing that I get. You know, I worry sometimes that I'm not good enough at this, or that if I try and do a thing I won't know what to do. But one of the things that is a main skill of mathematicians, and it's something that people who have this skill do well at school maths and they do well later on, is perseverance. I think in the education world it's often called resilience, but it's this idea that if you are stuck, you don't stop and give up. You can try again. And I think I've done enough maths now to know that if I get stuck on something, it won't stay like that forever. I know that if I go away and do something else, think about something else for a little while and come back to it, I'll have fresh eyes on it. I know that someone else has probably already had this problem somewhere, and the internet is a wonderful thing, and I can search on there and find other things that are similar that might be able to unstick me. I might, if I search on the internet, find something that confuses me even more, but you know, there's also the skill of kind of learning which things are actually going to be helpful and picking out the right things to read. But it's that is in itself quite a skill to recognize what is going to be useful to you as well. And it's just a case of I say it's not simple at all, but it can often just be a case of getting yourself in the right headspace. I remember reading about, there's a mathematician called Kathleen Ollerenshaw who was a really fantastic mathematician and educator, and she lived to over 100. I think I met her once, and she was from Manchester, where I'm from. And one of the things that people said about her was that when she got stuck on something, she would go to bed and she would sort of draw the mathematical symbols with her finger in the air just as she was falling asleep on some kind of imaginary whiteboard or blackboard, and just kind of put the image in her mind, and then when she fell asleep, she imagined that she was somehow dreaming the answers, and when she woke up they would just be there. And that's part of it, that you can't, like, the way your brain works, you can't just keep bashing away at something. Like, you do need to take a break, and in fact your brain will continue working on it when you're not actually thinking about it. So you come back to it, and there's something else there that wasn't there before, or you see something while you're doing something else that you think, oh, is it a bit like that? Oh, maybe I'll do that, or try that, or something. And it's just, you know, piecing those things together. Often, you know, people think of maths as quite a logical thing, but it's actually quite creative in a lot of ways, and it's about having sort of a moment of inspiration. Oh, what if I try this? What if I do this? Maybe this will help. But also, in terms of maths anxiety, as you know, someone involved in outreach and education, I've seen a few projects about maths anxiety, because it is a very specific problem. That actually, if your response to a mathematical question is actual fear, it's a physiological response. You know, your adrenaline goes and your brain starts working in different ways. And for some people, actually being faced with that makes it harder for them to do the maths. You know, it makes it more likely that they'll make mistakes. It makes them more difficult for them to recall bits of information that they need. And they've literally done studies on this, that if you put someone in an anxiety situation, it's harder for them to do maths. So if someone has that kind of response, it's not helpful to sort of make them continue trying to do it. You know, if someone is worried about it, they really need to take a step back, calm down, do something else for a bit, and then maybe come back and try a smaller problem, or a part of the problem, or the problem from a different angle, just to see if that is less anxiety inducing for them. But to a large extent, it's just familiarity, right? The more times you throw yourself at a maths problem, the more sort of, it's this resilience that you just sort of become quite gung-ho, and you're like, well, I've no idea what I'm doing, but I'll just try something and see what works. And that is basically the attitude you need to have as a mathematician, not, oh, what if I get it wrong? It's just, is it this? You know, just could this work? Yeah.
So everything that you've said, most of the things, maybe almost everything that you said, right from where you started saying that, okay, seeing that other people are in the same pool as I am, okay, everybody's confused, everybody's lost, I'm not the only one. So that kind of gives you some strength. And there is a real life example of this, not connected with math whatsoever. So we used to live next door to one old lady. She was our house owner in India. And this lady, she was in her late 70s. She was a widow, like her husband had passed away a year ago or something. And she used to have knee pains, and she was by herself. Once in a while, someone will come and meet her. We used to go and chat with her, but she used to have knee pains. So she said that whenever I get too downhearted, you know, whenever I'm feeling things are becoming too heavy for me, I'll go and visit the nearest hospital. And there I see people being in worse situation than me, and I begin to feel a little better about myself. So you see, there is a there is a kind of a way of looking that math can inspire, which is so present in life itself, that it's helping someone in their day-to-day life. And all these things that you said, be resilience, be this thing, these are things that are taught to people just by their parents. You know, be strong. It's a tough world out there. Don't give up. If you get stuck, you know, go back, do something else, and then come back to it. And then don't take it personally that you are the one who cannot do it. It's just something that you're finding difficult to do, and you'll get your way around it. But the whole fact that math is somehow so disconnected from life, whether because you are doing it only in school, or whether because of how it is being taught, we just don't try to apply these things that we learn in life into math, because it's ultimately you're bringing an approach to the problem. You know, as much as your familiarity, as much as your knowledge, you're also bringing a certain way of how I look at things is how I'll end up looking at math. Not all the times. People might be great mathematicians, and I know people who are geniuses might not have a very flourishing personal life, you know, in whatever way or manner, but there are people who are able to balance it. So this takes me to a question where, although we found some common ideas between math and life, do you think there are certain ideas that mathematicians are more privileged to have because they're so much in touch with math, and maybe if someone who doesn't do math might not have that option available to them in terms of thinking and looking at things?
Well, I mean, I would first of all like to point out that I don't think there's a distinction between mathematicians and not mathematicians. I think anyone can be a mathematician if they, if they think about things in a mathematical way and they, they learn mathematics. And I feel like sometimes unhelpfully people say, oh, I've not got a maths kind of brain. And it's like, well, or you just haven't done enough maths yet, or you haven't engaged with it. But I would say there is something about the way that maths makes you look at the world.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who is a mathematician, I remember once was visiting the town where I live, and they said, oh, it's good that you'll be there because it'll be nice to have a mathematician to talk to, because mathematicians are better than people who are mathematicians. And it was obviously it was very much a joke.
Yeah.
But I kind of know what they meant, because it was sort of there's a way of kind of looking at things. I think of it as sort of a precision of thought, that you kind of, you make sure that the things that you're saying are correct, and you make sure that the way you're wording things is correct. Because when you do mathematics, you need everything to be very precisely written and understood. And, the mathematicians, I feel, will be more likely to correct you if you say something that's not strictly completely accurate. But there's a sort of knowing glance that you pass between yourself and other people if you're like, oh yeah, well, we understand that you didn't mean exactly that, but okay. And I think that sort of way of looking at the world, that it is sort of in some sense desperately trying to cling on to the idea that it is in some sense a logical universe that we can understand and get our heads around, and sort of think about in that kind of precise way is nice. And also just the sort of, as I say, the resilience thing, but this idea of problem solving, that it's another one of those things that you need in order to be able to do maths, but actually is quite a useful skill in life in general. That your approach to things will be to sort of pull them apart and see how they work, and then try and figure things out. And working with mathematicians on projects, even not just on the maths aspect of it, but on the sort of organization and planning and things, we all very much sort of fall into the same, the plan always sort of falls together quite nicely, because we're all thinking in a similar kind of way. And obviously this is a massive generalization. There are a lot of different types of people who are mathematicians, and as I say, I think anyone can make use of those type of thinking methods, kind of using that sort of problem solving approach and precision of thought. But it is something that you really need in order to do mathematics well, because if you don't, your maths will fall apart. So it's in there. Yeah.
Sure. But here is maybe I'll be able to illustrate my point with an example a little better. So you've heard of the genius Indian mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan? Yes. Right. Yeah. So I think in 2015 they made a film on his life and his collaboration. It was called The Man Who Knew Infinity.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So there is a very short scene, and it's blink and miss scene, where he's leaving India. So they've taken the boat. It's going to be a sea voyage, month-long sea voyage. So they've taken their first boat, and he's sitting, and there's another gentleman sitting next to him. I don't think he is a mathematician. There's just another Indian going to England, just chatting up. And he says, we have this XYZ 1,000 miles to cover. It's going to be quite a journey. His response is, I have known bigger numbers. So I have known bigger numbers. So now mentally you have been engaging with numbers. But this is only one example. You've been engaging with numbers at such a high level that even though his voyage wasn't easy, he had a tough time on the thing, but he was maybe a little better prepared. Do you think, I tend to stretch things like this a little too much by looking into stories and trying to see what is really being conveyed? But some concepts, like I was talking to Dr. Balagar, and he was talking about how there's not one infinity, but there are multiple infinities. And in between infinities, there's possibility of I don't even understand that language, but it's so amazing to hear something like that. But to someone who is not doing active math, these ideas don't matter. These ideas don't occur. These ideas don't feel important. But I know through your outreach program, you are kind of bringing these ideas forward to people. But are there any ideas which are so practical that a mathematician says, oh, I'm taking this idea home, man. This is great. I'm going to apply it in my relationship, in the way I get my coffee, what time I get up. This works. Is there something like that?
That's a good question. I mean, I suspect I probably do it without realizing quite often that a lot of the things that you study in maths are kind of underlying structures underneath things, things like looking at permutations, like ways to reorder stuff. And just occasionally you'll approach a problem in the real world and you think, oh, there's a bit of maths I can use for this. This is good. I remember very strongly, we bought a wardrobe from IKEA, so it was a flat pack thing that we had to assemble ourselves, and it had a little note in with it, and it said, if your room is taller than this height, you can build the wardrobe lying down and then stand it up, but if your room is shorter than this height, you're going to have to build it standing up against the wall. And we thought, that's really weird, why does it say that? And then we just realized it was trigonometry, that literally the wardrobe wouldn't be able to move past that. Wow. You know, if the room wasn't tall enough, you wouldn't be able to stand it up, because when it's on an angle, it's going to be physically taller than it is when it's flat. And we're like, should we just check that number is right? And we did the calculations. We're like, yeah, that's pretty much the right number. Right. That's good. And obviously you could just test it by physically putting the thing in place. But it's sort of, you have the sort of exciting moments of like, oh, I'm doing a thing and it is useful. But it is a lot of the sort, especially the more abstract stuff, because obviously that's a very concrete calculation example. That's the kind of thing that people think of as maths. But even the sort of more abstract, sort of looking at structures behind things, it is all kind of in there underlying it. And I guess I don't necessarily consciously do that. I think there's also an extent to which I know the limitations of mathematical models. And this is another thing that it's important to understand as a mathematician who interacts with the real world. And in my research and in the kind of maths that I love to study, I'm mainly a pure mathematician. So I'm basically just thinking about these really abstract, nice ideas. But I'm aware that applied mathematics is this notion of saying, okay, here's a real world situation. How can I model this? And in order to model it, I will need to simplify this situation and just reduce it to sort of a number of small variables that I can then, change the values of and see what happens. But actually, in doing that, you lose quite a lot. And there's sometimes where you see a situation, and you think, can I use maths? It's actually not going to be worth it, because the amount of effort it would be to put the mathematical calculations together. I might as well just try the different things that I could do here and see which one works. Like, I could sit down and work out all the possibilities and decide which one is best, but actually that will take longer. So you kind of weigh up when it's actually going to be useful. But the fact that you understand the structure and you know that all of the possibilities are out there is quite a nice thing. And kind of when maths interacts with the real world in that way, it is really satisfying. Like the nice example is one of my colleagues who does maths talks about the maths of juggling. So he's a juggler, and he has a lot of skill in being able to juggle things. And he was, back in the day, he was involved with some people who developed a notation for writing down juggling tricks. So, you're throwing the balls in the air in different ways, but there are actually some patterns in that, and there are some very sort of easily written down different juggling tricks that you can do. And they started writing these things down. They came up with a notation called sight swap. And what they found was that actually, there's this one that you do 3 and 3 and 3, and you can just juggle 3 balls, or you can do, 3 and 5, and you can juggle 3 balls, but in a different pattern. And there was one in between that was like, there was a 4, and they were like, is that a thing? Has anyone done that? Is that a juggling trick? And they realized that it was a possible juggling trick that you could do, but no one had ever done it before, because no one had tried to write it down in this kind of way. And they did it, and they were like, this is a thing. And it became like the new craze for several months. It was like the hot new trick in juggling that no one had done it before. But it was sort of sat there in between these two other tricks, just waiting for someone to find it. And it was only the mathematical approach that had kind of revealed that. And I think that's a really nice example of the fact that sometimes just trying to sort of encode something in a more rigorous mathematical way will help you to understand it better. Even if all you're doing is throwing balls around in the air, it's not anything important or serious, but it is actually, there is a structure to it, and there is a pattern behind it.
Yeah, and like in one of your talks where you're talking about how a lot of mathematicians love puzzles, and you said it makes sense, and then how you proceeded to explain how it makes sense, because in both, what you're doing is you're trying to break a big problem down into smaller pieces. You're trying to see if you can apply an idea that you already have into, and apply it to this new problem that you're now facing. And I think just this, for me, this is probably like how we say between the lines, this is what is probably happening between the numbers. This is like some kind of a philosophy at work. And because it is philosophy, it can work with math, and it does work with math. Probably a bit of it can be taken into life and applied. Yeah, it's a big problem. We have someone to take to the hospital, or some problem to be dealt with, some rents to be paid, or whatever. And maybe without, like you said, if you become anxious, and it's not just in math. If you are anxious, I've experienced this. I'm sure many people have experienced it. It's not a pleasant outcome anyway. So if you're in muck and you want to get out of it, maybe allowing yourself to become anxious is not a good idea. And here is how you need not get anxious, because you have these couple of 4-5 things you can do. At least you'll keep your mind busy. Something like
Yeah, I know when I was younger, my mum always used to say, emotions make you stupid. And obviously emotions are important and wonderful things, but it is harder to think straight when you're emotional about something. And I guess it's having the clarity and the experience to be able to take a moment and be calm and think logically and rationally about things. And as you say, in any situation, that's important. But having the experience of solving problems before probably helps a little bit to feel like, oh, it's okay, I've been in a situation like this before. What do I need to do next? Yeah.
So staying on this topic of puzzles for a little bit, here is what I wanted to originally ask you is, both doing puzzles and doing math, they require a certain way of thinking and a certain way of looking at the problem. So there are two questions that I have here. That number one is, how different or how similar are your ways of looking at the problem when you're solving a puzzle or doing math? How similar or how different?
Well, it depends on the puzzle, I guess. It depends on the context of the puzzle. So one of my big hobbies is doing puzzle competitions there's a team based in America that we solve with. So we join them on the internet, and we work on puzzles online, and they have kind of online puzzle competitions where they release a whole bunch of puzzles at once, and you have to try and solve as many as you can. And in that situation, it's almost like a sport. You really need to get the puzzles right and as quickly as possible. But if I'm just doing something for fun at home, it's sort of less important. And I guess on that scale of sort of how important is it that I get this right and that I'm exactly correct with this, obviously in any sense I would like to always be correct, because that's the best thing to be, but as I've said, it's sometimes an unhelpful thing to kind of worry too much about that. But if I'm just doing something for fun, it's just sort of fairly low effort and I'm not too worried about it. I would probably have a slightly different approach than if I'm doing something rigorous that definitely needs to be correct because it is for a specific reason. But there's a lot of commonality. I think there's a lot of overlap in the sort of approaches and the methods. And again, practice, having applied those methods lots of times is a helpful way to start. But it's it's just sort of that kind of how do I start? What do I need to do next? And especially with a lot of the online puzzle hunt puzzles, they don't give you any instructions. It's not like a Sudoku where it says you have to do this, this, and this. You just get given a grid of numbers, or you just get given, some pictures of some stuff, and you have to identify what all the pictures are and work out what the connection is between them and that kind of thing. It's a lot of it is just sort of what could be going on here. And I feel like there's a lot of overlap between that and the sort of real world mathematical modeling stuff, because if you're looking at a real world situation, there isn't a neatly written out question that says you have 4 pineapples, like you would find in a maths problem at school. Like, you literally have to come up with the question yourself. And that's something that people really struggle with. I think certainly at school, if you learn maths in that way, that is just like, here is a list of questions that you should write down the answers to, you don't develop the skill to be able to go, okay, what do I need to count? What do I need to measure? What do I need to observe in order to model this situation? And that's a skill that people learning about mathematical modeling really have to develop, because because even though you've got all of these mathematical tools that you can apply to the situation, you need to use the right one. You need to pick which of your puzzle solving skills to put into play. So brilliant. That's part of the skill as well.
And great. Now a slightly abstract question, if I can call it that. In this wonderful presentation of yours, which you call Stories of mathematics. Right. You show how similar mathematical ideas can be discovered across ages, across time, across the world. And you use the example of the Pascal triangle, how it was, even though it's named after Pascal, it was discovered 500 years before him by Al-Karaji, a mathematician from Baghdad. Before that, semblances of it were seen in ancient India, in Japanese tradition, where it was called something else. So, and I'm sure there are many more examples of such similar mathematical ideas being found all over the world at different times. This was one. And then there are those that probably aren't. Like, it's not every mathematical idea is being found today, here, tomorrow, there, but there are certain ones that are being found. Now, the ones that are being found to be like discovered at different times and by different people, is there an underlying meaning to these ideas being found? Can they in somewhere perhaps tell us something about who we are and what it's all about, or as philosophers of mathematicians like to call it, the nature of reality? Does it say something about it?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the examples that you see of that kind of thing tend to be more historical. And I think I absolutely wish no insult to mathematicians of history, but maths was easier back then, because a lot of the ideas that we were finding were very basic things about number and about structure and about prime numbers and the patterns in and it's sort of simple geometrical constructions and things like that. And obviously at the time, as a species, we didn't have the advanced mathematical knowledge that we do now, so a lot of it was just sort of laying the groundwork for that and finding those sort of fairly simple ideas. And I'm not going to say low-hanging fruit, but the idea that mathematicians in ancient Greece, the problems that they were working on are things that we now teach in school, because they are those sort of very basic foundations of mathematics. But at the time, that was completely new and no one had actually written that down before. And I think a lot of those discoveries are of those sort of very fundamental key concepts in mathematics that, Pascal's triangle is a beautiful object. It's got so many wonderful patterns in it, it's got so many connections to other areas of maths, and it is really simply defined. But actually, just anyone could write down those numbers, but actually seeing those patterns and seeing the importance of it was a really, really crucial step at that point in the history of maths. And the fact that it happened in several places, I'm not massively surprised by, because it is something that is quite sort of fundamental and important. And I think I'm not saying that nowadays there aren't mathematicians on other sides of the world who happen to pick up the same problem at the same time and come to the same answer. But I think you'll see a lot more examples of that kind of thing looking back into history for that reason. And then a lot of the way that maths works is it sort of builds on previous things. So the level that we are as a species will kind of increase over time. And also because of the nature of the world and the way that things worked out, a lot more of the maths that you hear about is from the sort of 18th century Europe, which was when a lot of the maths was kind of written down, I guess, rather than or written down in a way that was then shared and kind of propagated around the world. But I think there'll be a lot of people who made discoveries in mathematics that we never find out about. They wrote it down somewhere and it got lost, or they did this work and they told someone, but that didn't necessarily mean that it became part of mathematical sort of knowledge generally. Possibly at a time before the world realized that we were going to become one connected global international thing where we all just share information and knowledge and improve our knowledge as a species. So it's a complicated question, because a lot of that stuff is quite political as well, in terms of
but if you just say like in terms of the underlying pattern, is there because I think from what I have come to understand, it seems some of the purpose of math also seems to be to understand the nature of our world, the nature of reality, and all of those things. So do these discoveries, do you think there is an underlying pattern about the nature of reality that maybe is there a...
It's sort of a philosophy of maths question as well. I mean, as I say, a lot of the early maths was done from a sort of quite practical standpoint. So a lot of the things about calculating pi, the area of a circle was the thing that it was important to know if you were going to store your grain in a circular building or whatever, how much grain will I have? And those calculations were done for very practical sort of how much tax do you have to pay and how much, how many animals do you have in your herd and that kind of thing. In the early days, it was very simple but very functional in that sense. And it was only people like philosophers who had the time to sit around pondering about the nature of these things that could go beyond those questions of very immediate practical solutions to real problems. And things like astronomy, looking at the sky, predicting the motion of the planet and that kind of thing, that was all sort of very practical stuff. And that's why a lot of early maths tends to be focused on those types of things. But sort of philosophically, I guess, because there's sort of schools of thought around whether maths is something that we create or something that we discover. Like, does maths sort of exist out there in the universe separate from us, and we're just, picking it off a tree like fruit, or is it something that we ourselves are actually creating? I think it's a difficult one, and I've probably been asked about this in interviews before, and I can't remember which way I've said, because I think I'm probably somewhere on the fence in between the two, because yes, these concepts, things like numbers and prime numbers and these geometrical structures and things, all do sort of exist without our interference. You can derive them separately. Different people can come to the same conclusion in different places, just because they are very sort of fundamental. But then I think there are layers to it that actually the way that we choose to interpret it, the way that we choose to write it down, the notation we use, the aspects of each thing that we find important will influence the way that that study is then kind of continued and the way that we develop that knowledge. So it's sort of a mixture of the two.
How beautiful.
Because it is in itself a really beautiful idea that maths is sort of a collaboration between us and the universe. I guess that if you started off a fresh planet with the same humans on it, would we evolve maths in a slightly different way? Would we have different names for things, different notation? And I think there would be some concepts that were common, and I think they would be these kind of really fundamental things that people kind of develop independently all over the world. But we've now reached a stage where if someone looks at a particular mathematical structure, they can find out what that's called. Someone's already studied it, someone's already done some research on it, and they'll be influenced by that previous work, which again is in itself a wonderful thing, that maths is sort of building on the work of previous mathematicians. And this is something I'm really passionate about, the idea that we're kind of building a toolbox to share and use, but that in itself means that we're kind of going in a direction that we've already chosen. So
yeah, especially in today's times. I am a non-expert. I don't do active mathematics, but because of the way people like yourselves have been putting out your videos, and you've done the hard work out in the lab, and now you kind of juice it out for us in a half-hour video, and it makes sense. It makes sense. It gives us the courage to ask certain questions, and hope for certain answers, and not feel too lost if you don't find the right question or the right answer. But it kind of cements the ground under your feet. So yeah, I'd like to thank you and so many mathematicians for it. I have one last question. So back on the number file podcast that you did, you spoke about what being a mathematician means to you. And although that's what essentially we've been exploring, right? But here is something that I found really interesting. You said, I think math is more of a state of mind. I think you said that earlier also in our conversation. So you said, I think math is more of a state of mind. If you think like a mathematician, then you are a mathematician. So I want to ask you, what do you mean by think like a mathematician, and what's your thought process? And
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of, it kind of relates back to, there was a blog post I did several years ago where I just printed myself some new business cards and I needed to know what to put on them. And it was at a time when I'd stopped doing actual research in actual maths in an actual maths department. And I was like, can I still call myself a mathematician? And there was this whole conversation that we had around, who's a violinist? Is anyone who plays a violin a violinist? Or do you have to be a professional that gets paid to play the violin in order to call yourself a violinist? And in the same way, do you have to be someone whose job is to research in mathematics in order to say you're a mathematician? And there's something really empowering about, if I go and do a workshop in a school, I will occasionally refer to the people in the room as mathematicians. I'll say, oh, it's good that I've got a whole room full of mathematicians to agree with the thing that I've just said. And it almost sometimes surprises the kids a little bit that I refer to them as mathematicians, but it is about kind of the way that you're doing things. And if you're doing maths, if you're calculating things, or if you're looking at patterns in things, or if you're understanding things and trying to pull them apart and analyze them in that kind of way, that is mathematics. And if you're doing that, then I think you're allowed to consider yourself a mathematician if you want to. And I'm obviously not, I'm not going to require people to put labels on themselves, but I think if you want to think of yourself as a mathematician and that is helpful to you, then you are completely allowed to do that. If you are doing mathematical thinking, and it is that that sort of precision of wording, precision of thought, understanding things, being precise about how you're defining stuff, and fitting it all together and seeing how it works. And it's something that I find a lot of joy and enjoyment in, because it's satisfying when it works. And it's sometimes satisfying when it doesn't work. You just sort of get a glimpse of something and you think, oh, okay, yeah, I can see where that's going, but I'm not going to do the heavy lifting to actually confirm that. But it's, I guess, if you find satisfaction in that, there's a quote from Matt Parker, who's someone I've worked with a lot, and I often quote this because I think it's really, really nice. But he said, mathematicians aren't people who find maths easy, they're people who enjoy the fact that it's difficult. And I think if you can get to a point where you can sort of see how this thing fits together and think, I like that, that is nice, that is one of the things that makes you a mathematician, I guess.
So there is a quote on your website, and like a quote as in someone has a 7-year-old kid, I think, has given you feedback on your work, and it's something like, I like the math lady, I want to be a mathematician. I think I understand where it's coming from and how it all adds up. Dr. Katie, what a pleasure it was to listen to you, to talk to you, and thank you for agreeing to do this, for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah.
My conversation with Dr. Steckles helped me understand that math is for anyone who wants to add rigor and discipline to their thinking. It also helped me understand that finding a problem in math difficult, or math itself difficult, does not mean the end of the world. It just means we haven't yet found the underlying pattern, and that with perseverance and resilience, anyone can find those hidden patterns. It will be wonderful to know your thoughts on the interview, and if it inspired your worldview in any way. Thanks for being here. I will see you soon with another interesting mind demystifying another interesting topic. Until then, take care.